What can we expect from the Greenback, the pandemic having effect on the US economy, and Brexit negotiations continue? We also look at the economy in Asia. All this with Bob Mason of FX Empire. This is your week ahead. Hello, Bob, and thank you once again for joining us. Let's start with the Greenback. It was a relatively quiet week for the Greenback last week. What can we expect from the US dollar in the upcoming week?
In the week ahead for the dollar, obviously risk appetite remains the key driver. Risk aversion being, the go-to in terms of the Greenback. There are a number of key stats, however, to look out for. Obviously, we've got consumer confidence numbers. That's going to be a key teller in terms of how the consumers are responding to the easing of lockdown measures. And then we've got the COVID-19 numbers as well. Those are going to be particularly key. Late last week, we saw an uptrend in the number of new cases. Now, is that attributed to the easing of lockdown measures or just the odd blip? So if we see a continued upward trend, then that's going to raise some eyebrows and could raise some concerns that the government, we need to go about turn on obviously easing lockdown measures, and that could be a dent in the economic outlook. Obviously, we heard from Fed Chair Powell, who also spoke of the relevance of the COVID-19 numbers. So expect that consumer sentiment, and obviously then there's US and China to also consider in the week ahead.
So it seems the coronavirus pandemic is still having a major effect on the US economy. But let's move on to other currencies, the euro and the pound in particular. What can we expect from those currencies next week?
For the euro, you've got obviously consumer confidence, consumption figures that you need to be looking out for. But really, it's about COVID-19 numbers. If that downward trend continues, then that's a positive for the euro. And then obviously, we're looking for a finalized stimulus aid program to deliver that boost as the economies continue to open up, that should support a rebound, at least in service sector activity. There's some concerns over manufacturing if that US-China sort of tension becomes more of a war of words and becomes actually really a trade war of sorts. For the pound, it's Brexit and COVID-19. We're seeing the UK having to retain lockdown measures for a longer period. That leaves the UK economy lagging its neighbours, and obviously Brexit's leaving plenty of uncertainty for the markets to consider, and that leaves the pound under pressure. Even though there was a slight pickup last week, we're not expecting a breakout anytime soon.
So some downside in the markets on those front. How about the Asian economies, specifically Japan and China? How are they faring?
For China and the yuan, really it's the China-US tete-a-tete that's going on at the moment that needs to be the area of focus and likely to be the key driver. Obviously, any sanctions on China and increase in tariffs, that's going to hurt, the prospects of a China economic rebound in the near term. And obviously that's going to have ripple effects. So that should, leave the yuan at 7 levels and avoid sub 7 against the dollar for now, at least. Something we've talked about over the last few weeks. So as long as that risk remains, and obviously we've got manufacturing activity, almost at a standstill. It was slightly better across the EU and the US, but it's still not great, and that's going to, deliver weak demand for China. So that's those are the main issues that are going to pin back the yuan. Let's see what happens with this current spat between the US and China. The Japanese yen, don't expect too much. As we saw last week, we've got deflation back in Japan. That doesn't bode too well from a monetary policy front, and the yen's certainly out of favour from a safe haven perspective. That could change. So should obviously coronavirus numbers begin to pick up in the US. But with, the pressure on the Japanese economy and obviously the effects of COVID-19, the dollar remains the safe haven of choice, and the yen remains in the ranges of sort of 106 to 108 levels for now.
So it seems that the Asian markets are suffering just as much as pretty much the global markets are at the moment. Let's look away from the calendars now and focus on geopolitical matters. How's that looking for next week?
Looking away from the economic calendar, you really do have to consider what China's response is going to be should the US oust Chinese companies from the US exchanges and ban the listing of Chinese companies on the US exchanges. Obviously, that's going to mean a lot for the likes of Apple and others that are dependent on the consumer in China. and obviously manufacturing as well. It's going to be quite costly for these types of companies to relocate production out of China at the drop of a hat. And obviously some of those CEOs are going to be a bit miffed that this move has come from the US administration without any longer term planning. So really US-China is the main area of focus. And then for the pound, you've got Brexit, that lack of progress. And as you know, we go into June, Boris Johnson was looking at a drop dead date for June, end of June, should there be no blueprint in place for obviously trade and so forth for the Brexit plan. So that, yeah, there's plenty to consider at the moment. But China and US first, then Brexit. You know, those are the two main areas of focus.
Okay, Bob, that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us once again. That was The Week Ahead with Bob Mason of FX Empire. Don't forget to follow us on our social media outlets such as Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay in touch with all the latest information.